Thank you all for being here. My name is Gary Walter, and I am supposed to stand behind the microphone. I'm not one of those people that like to stand behind podiums, and I'm not actually one who's a fan of lecturing. I'm more a fan of discussion because I figure that I am not the smartest person in the room. And I also believe that together, collectively, we can do more than any of us can individually. This whole idea of crew resource management is something that has interested me long before there was a name to it. I started working on this and dealing with these concepts a long time before it became a thing. And who knew? And I just wanted to go over some of the basic concepts. I had the unique opportunity in 1978 of showing up at a plane crash in Portland, Oregon. It was a DC-8, went down in northeast Portland. What had happened is they were flying in from Denver to Portland, and as they came in to land, they heard the landing gear go clunk, but the little red light didn't come on, telling them that it was okay. And so they circled around the city of Portland. It was December 29th, 1978. Icy cold out. We don't get icy cold like you do here in the Midwest, but it was icy cold for the Northwest. And as they circled around, trying to figure out this landing gear problem, to the point where they even flew by the control tower, and the control operators looked through binoculars to try and look at the landing gear to see if it was seated. They also were burning fuel as they made these laps around the airport. And what happened as they finally decided it's time to come in. We're not going to do any good flying around anymore. They had the crash rescue trucks up and down the runway. They had EMS on standby. They were ready to go. And as they came flying in, the engines flamed out. They ran out of fuel. And they were still about 10 miles from the airport. So the pilot, everybody credits him for saving a lot of lives. Only 10 people were killed out of the 100 and some people that were on board. He picked out a dark spot in the city, figured it was an abandoned part of town, and put the airplane down into that dark spot. Well, there happened to be some huge Douglas fir trees and a couple of houses that were unlit. The people were not home. Destroyed the houses, ripped the wings off, and I'm sitting at home, or I think I was out driving around in my big four-wheel drive pickup thinking I was really cool because it was icy and I could drive around. And I heard this. And so with my newly minted EMT card, I had been an EMT for just over a year, I drove to the scene. And there was a plainclothes police officer standing out in traffic, blocking traffic, so you couldn't get through into the area. And I flashed my EMT card, and he waved me through. And I ended up at a church, which was being used for the walking wounded, for the green-tagged triage center. And I walked around that church for a little bit, and there wasn't really anything to do. There were very few major injuries, very few, like I said, only 10 deaths. And it turns out that 20 years later, I was working with a lady who was on that airplane and was a 10-year-old girl and was in that church, the one I was walking around. Of course, we didn't recognize each other, but I flew with her from Baltimore back to Portland after a conference, an EMS conference, and she had a hold of the armrests on the seat, just this death grip. And I looked at her and I said, "Debbie, do you know the odds of you being involved in a second airplane collision?" And she looked at me, and without missing a beat, she goes, "Yeah, but you've never been in one." But it was this plane crash that turned out to be pivotal to the development of crew resource management in the airline industry. They realized that one of the reasons that plane went down is because the captain was so focused on that light and the landing gear that he wasn't watching the other signs and symptoms and didn't realize the fuel was running out. And the way that cockpit management was handled at that time is it wasn't okay for another crew member to tag on him and say, hey, we're running out of fuel. It was a very militaristic environment in those aircraft. And so while the flight engineer and the co-pilot knew that plane was running out of fuel, they were not able to speak up and share the situational awareness that was going on in that aircraft, and it went down. Because of that, the pilot, the captain, was raked over the coals. He never flew again, but the passengers on that plane, even to this day, they revere him as saving so many lives. But that is where crew resource management entered the airline industry. Some of the people here in the black and white photograph I ended up working with later when I went to work for Buck Ambulance. This guy here is no longer in EMS, he runs a bar. Go figure. Crew resource management, from a really basic standpoint, can be summarized very simply. If you can develop your situational awareness through curiosity, through good communication, and through cooperation, you're gonna do what it takes to create a high reliability organization. That's what we want to do, isn't it? Your employer wants you to be reliable. Your employer wants you to do certain things. But what I want to bring it down to today is why you would want to do that. It's one thing to save your employer millions of dollars because of lawsuits or aircraft going down or motor vehicle accidents or things like that. But it's another thing to save yourself from a lot of different things. I want to focus on safety. I want to focus on quality patient care. And I want to focus on job satisfaction. This is why I got into this topic 3 decades ago. This is why I began to start thinking about scene management and what it takes in order to do that. When I started in EMS, there was no 911 system. I ran my first call in 1974. I was an Explorer Scout with the fire department. I was standing there in the fire station at 15 years old with my finger in my ear, wondering what I was doing there. And the rescue went out, and the guy walked by me and he said, "You want to go?" And I go, "Yeah." And I climbed into the back, and they went up some suburban rural road, and I was rolling around in the back wondering which end was up. And when we arrived on scene, they handed me, it was pitch black out, they handed me a road flare and said, "Run down the road and light these flares." I'd never seen a road flare before in my life. And I stood there in the dark. There was a rollover up on this road, and they went that direction, and they sent me that direction. And I stood there in the dark with this road flare, not knowing how to light it. And I didn't have a flashlight. I didn't have anything. And I peeled it open, and I tried striking it on the ground, and I tried all kinds of stuff. And I finally, in the dark, figured out, oh, there's a little striker cap on top of the cap, and yay, I'm a hero. And I lit road flares. And 6 years later, when I got into full-time EMS, in order to summon an ambulance to your home, you had to call a 7-digit number. And we had our own dispatchers. And we were the well-known ambulance service in town. We would often drive by each other, race each other to calls. I heard stories, even from back in as early as 1978, as late as 1978, depending on how you look at it, where there are fist fights on scene over who was going to take the patient. But what I learned in the EMS system that I grew up in, there was a paramedic and an EMT, and we ran the call. It was just the two of us. And because we worked together 24/7, we're actually working 48-hour shifts now, 48s. And we knew each other. We understood how each other operated. We understood why and how and what we were going to do. And we could just go in and develop this rapport. Well, within the next year or two, they developed the 911 system. And that opened up a whole can of worms all of a sudden the fire department wanted to go on EMS calls. And now, instead of just 2 of us on scene, there were often 7 of us on scene. And if you ask people what their number one fear is, it's talking to a crowd. And yet, here we are with some little old lady sitting in her bedroom, shortness of breath, the worst night of her life, and we go barging in with 7 people, half of them wearing turnout coats and helmets, barking questions at her and causing the whole scene to deteriorate. And I watched this, and I hated it. It from a safety perspective, it was dangerous because you've seen it. One person draws up a med, they hand it to another, who hands it to another. What's one of the big issues that we have today? Medication errors. We pass that on. From a patient care standpoint, from a job satisfaction, to me, it felt like my job satisfaction as a EMT, as a new paramedic, was just going down because there was just this chaos. And the way that we used to deal with patients, it wasn't easy to just kneel down by this little lady, hold her hand, talk to her while you treat her. Because if you took your eyes off the target for a minute, somebody else would jump in. And you're having arguments about whether it should be an 18 gauge or a 20 gauge, whether you should hang a drip or put in a lock, and it's just like, oh, brother, let's just figure this out. And so with the newly developed QA committee process, we began to pull charts and we began to see that this wasn't just a social, emotional, political issue, but it was a real issue. And so the county EMS department empowered me to create a video, and I put together this video, and I want to just show you a clip of it. But we put together these 3 vignettes. There were 6 scenes total where we did the wrong way to run a call and the right way. One was a trauma, one was a cardiac arrest. And I wanted to show you the cardiac arrest one because it was the funniest one, the messed up part. But the technology is so outdated, you would just laugh at the rate of CPR that we're doing, let alone that, fertility, and all kinds of other stuff that we're doing. So I settled on this last call, and I just want to show you a clip. I presented this at our county EMS meeting, and then I did it at the other county, and then I did it at the other county. I ended up taking this all over the state of Oregon and presenting it. About 1,000 different people saw this over the course of about 2 years. And I would show a clip and we'd have a discussion. I'd show the other clip and have a discussion. Because we don't have time to go through the whole thing, I just wanted to show you a clip, and this afternoon I put some tags up on the YouTube video to kind of show you some of the things that we would talk about. These people have all gone on to really good careers. Speaking of airline pilots, this guy right here front and center with the bald head, he and I were Explorer Scouts together. He now flies jet airplanes after he retired from the fire department. The guy in the back with the dark hair is a fire chief somewhere in Oregon. And this lady sitting here went on to become a training officer and just retired in the last few years. So I'll just give you a clip of what we did back then.
after tablets. Apparently he's taken 2 at the same time, about an hour and a half.
Well, you know the monitor says.
Taking 2. Did you get that? No. What are we? The nitroglycerin.
What kind of history does she have?
Alcohol. Right in the top. I don't know that yet. Right there. That's it.
Allergies,
Yeah.
medications.
There we go.
And here's some more medication.
Do you have any
allergies?
still heart disease?
Just want you to see if I can attach it.
Okay. She's still on a sinus rhythm, not carried out any.
Hey, Francis, I'm going to start an IV here in your arm.
It's good with
You got the IV already?
Just have to have that gun in it. Here, let me get 1985. Now, we're going to start heparin on this, right?
Well, we've already got all the
You got fluid hanging?
Okay.
What do
You're
you
going to start heparin.
Yeah, we already know the fluid.
All right, fine. All right.
You ready?
Keep both here, Francis.
Okay.
Just roll over.
No allergies?
Here we go.
Oh,
I'm sorry. All right, it's going to have to be another
Yeah,
poke
you
here.
ready?
okay.
Not that I know.
Another poke. Here we go.
Do you have any other?
Okay, sorry about that. About a 4x4, please.
No,
April
17th or something. Right here.
4x4. We not open it.
I'd like to say that my program eliminated that, but the last I worked in EMS 3 or 4 years ago, calls were still going like this. And it drives me crazy that we're not putting the patient first and that we're just bouncing ideas around and that we're not trusting each other and we're not communicating. And so one of the things that I tried to solve through this program was good communication and to run calls with a team leader. We did come out, we had we now have a protocol in the Portland metro area called the paramedic in charge protocol, and it does eliminate some of the difficulty and it does designate who the team leader is, but it hasn't, from what I'm seeing, calls are still running like this. I've seen ICUs run like this, I've seen EDs run like this. And the whole idea of streamlining the communication. So here's my vision of how this could go. And I've actually been on calls that go like this.
So we can look at your heart, and this gentleman is going to take your vital signs for me, and I'm going to have my partner start an IV in case we need to give you any medications. Do you take any other medicine? Okay, do you know what they are? I think they're on first.
Yeah, on your side here.
Blood pressure, one spike, I'll spike that back.
Take a deep breath for me. Let it out. Again, please. Pick up some expiratory wheezes and some reels, and we'll go over those.
Okay, could you tell me what the monitor says?
The monitor should have sinus rhythm at 90.
Oh, that's it. Should be over. Do you please get the gurney for me so we can get her going?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, I have some people getting the gurney for us, and what we're going to do when that comes back in is we're going to put you on the gurney and we're going to take you out to the ambulance so we can take you to the hospital. Okay. Is there any? I think so. If your medication isn't helping you with that discomfort.
you been on either of those calls before? Is it frustrating to you too, or am I the only one? What do you think is the biggest stumbling block to creating a good cooperative center?
Lack of communication.
Lack of communication? In what way?
Everyone, no leadership, I guess I should say.
Okay, no leadership?
It's everyone going at it.
Yeah,
It's chaos.
yeah,
Or everybody wants to be a leader.
yeah.
Chaos.
Chaos. Why is it that we can't let somebody else lead? I know I'm the best paramedic in the room, but so what? What does that matter? One of the things that is, I think, what I've noticed when I have interns or I'm precepting, and when I watch other people precept, is those that are confident in their skills allow their interns to do a lot. But those who are uncomfortable with their skills or their knowledge base or their ability to treat patients tend to jump in, and they don't let their interns do very much. But I think that confidence of knowing that you're comfortable with what you're doing allows you to let other people make mistakes. So they want to put a 16 gauge in and you wanted an 18. So, you know, is it really gonna hurt? So they wanted to give the nitro before getting the 12 lead. Yeah, by protocol, blah, 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 you know, but can you do that in a way that you can still let them be the leader? Can you have that conversation? That's what I want to talk about. I didn't know this was called crew resource management. I didn't know that's what this was. All I knew is I wanted the scenes to run smoother. And now we got a name to it. And there are books written about it. Lots of books written about it. Lots of information. The airline industry, NASA, has embraced crew resource management and just culture. The hospital industry, the medical care industry is, that's just going some places. EMS has named just culture to be the standard within the EMS community. And it's starting to take off. There are fire departments that are incorporating crew resource management. There are law enforcement agencies that are beginning to do this. Some do it well, some not so well. High reliability organizations. To me, this is why we do crew resource management, is so that we become a high reliability organization. When there is stuff going on, we tend to get into the way we've always done it. Have you ever had somebody show up new in your agency and they're always telling you how their old agency did things? Is that a pleasant thing, or is that something that we... Oh, shut up. Why would they be doing that? Is it because their other agency was all that good? Or is it because they are trying to understand your agency? Or is it because they want to improve your agency and bring new things to you? Because maybe you become complacent. Why become an HRO? Why become a high reliability organization? The number one thing is safety. Now, your hospital, your employer, they want you to be safe because it costs millions of dollars to lose lives in helicopters. I would like to think that corporations and board members care about us as individuals, and I think that they do. but it also gets really, really expensive when a helicopter crashes. Really expensive. And you lose business. But why do I care? Because I want to go home to my family. Because I want to keep doing the job I love. I want to make a difference. And until I had a family, I would go over any cliff and climb in any helicopter anytime. But now with a family, safety matters to me. So I got hired by Life Flight in 1988 in the Portland metro area. They had never had paramedics on board until that time. But AIMS, I don't think it's called AIMS anymore. It's called CAMES now.
AIMS.
Had determined that you needed 2 medical personnel in addition to the pilot. And they decided to hire paramedics. And I was one of the first 14 that was hired there. And we went through, we had our own local flight paramedic certification process. It was pretty good. And all the nurses were CCRN, and we had a really good team. And we learned a lot from them, and they learned a lot from us. But the idea of pulling the plug or aborting a flight, we talked about that. But when it came right down to it, it got very interesting. So we were taught that anybody can abort the flight, right? You probably have similar problems. So I'm flying to this flight. I need to back up a little bit. This slide went a little bit quicker. I'm flying out west of Portland, southwest of Portland, to a little community called Newburgh, little community hospital. We're going to have to pick up a patient, and it's dark, and it's rainy, which is why I had it go dark. And we're flying through mountain ranges of 2,000, 3,000 foot mountains. And we're flying the road. We didn't do IFR, unless you count I Fly Roads. We're following the highway out, and we're in this little valley, and we have 1,000 foot ceiling minimum. And I don't remember what the forward visibility minimum was, but I got this Vietnam veteran pilot up front. The guy has flown in combat with missiles going around him and gunfire. And I got, sitting across from me, I got this very experienced flight nurse who's been everywhere in a helicopter. And I'm sitting there, and I'm from Portland. I'm used to rain. I'm used to dark. I'm used to all this stuff. But it starts getting dark. I mean, it was dark before we took off. But it's getting really dark, and it's raining. And I hear the pilot muttering through the headset about visibility and nervous. And I'm not scared because I'm 20-something years old and I'm not afraid of anything. But there was a sense of uneasiness. And this is something that as you learn about situational awareness, it's one thing you want to pay attention to. If things are ambiguous, if there's an uneasiness, you want to pay attention to that. But I'm the new guy. I don't want to pull the plug. I don't want to look like the whip. I don't want to look like I'm a coward. I'm looking over at Sue, and she's spiking IV bags or doing whatever flight nurses do when they're getting ready to land at the community hospital. And I'm looking up at the pilot, and he doesn't look nervous, except I do hear this muttering over the headset. And at some point, I knew that we were threading a needle. The valley was getting narrower, the ceiling was coming down, it was getting very dark. And at some point, the pilot decided to abort the flight. And the U-turn that he made was very risky all by itself, because he virtually had to just kind of hover and make a little turn, because there wasn't a lot of room to do that. And we get back to the base, we get back to the hospital, and we all kind of like, whoa, that was kind of interesting. Yeah, it was. I was thinking we should have aborted it, and Sue says, yeah, me too. And the pilot, turns out he'd only worked there for about 3 months before I had. He didn't want to look like the wimp either. even though he's his tough Vietnam veteran. And that conversation never went further than the three of us. The organization never got to learn from that experience. And that's the problem. And that's why crew resource management is an issue as far as safety. What's going to kill you? Probably heart disease. Probably cancer. As a kid, I used to think a meteor was going to fall on me, and that actually makes the list. 1 in 20,000 chance. But probably what's going to kill most of us is the motor vehicle accident. We take that for granted. Now, as I drove into Omaha tonight, right at 5 o'clock, I didn't take it for granted. I grew up driving the streets of Portland, and I've driven in LA, and I've driven in Chicago, but I'm living in Lincoln right now, and I don't commute on regular hours. In this traffic business, especially at 57 years old, it's like, whoa. But traffic is a high-frequency event. It's still a high-risk event, but we don't think of it as high risk. We think of it as low risk, but it is a high-frequency, high risk. It's the low-frequency, low-risk events that scare us. So I'm reading this book. It's called Traffic. I've been wanting to read it for 7 or 8 years. And kind of as an amateur traffic control specialist, yeah, come on, you all are. You pounded on the fist and you yelled at other people and you analyzed traffic. I've seen the result of thousands of MVCs. I used to drive my car about 20 miles per hour faster than the normal flow of traffic. So I was always analyzing traffic and picking my way through. This guy has research to back this up of what traffic does and what it doesn't do. Ambulance crashes are up. Currently, EMS workers have a death rate of 7 per 100,000 FTEs, one of the riskiest jobs in the country. A few years ago, not that long ago, about 10 years ago, that rate was 12 deaths per 100,000 FTEs. We brought it down. We're doing things to make ambulances safer. We are training people to always buckle up. When I was working on a ground ambulance a few years ago, I always clicked in. And if you're just doing a routine transport where you can put your feet up on the gurney and you can sit back and work on your chart, no problem. You get in a front-end collision, it's going to be very interesting, the dynamics on your body is that seatbelt and you're thrown this way. And the medic catcher net, we'll just see how that all works out. I don't want to do that. There's new designs that they're working on, rear-facing seats, all this other sort of stuff. I've been driving. I've had to slam on the brakes. People are in the back doing CPR. They all come through the passenger compartment and end up in the front with me. This is one of the more dangerous things you're going to do. But here's an interesting quote from the book that I want to show you. With the drive cams and the way that they have come up, they have actually found that when people are driving code 3, they are safer than when they are just normal driving. Because when you're driving lights and siren, you're very aware of your surroundings. You have heightened situational awareness. And you got people in the back. I always tell my EMT drivers, you better be driving smooth when I'm taking care of a patient. I'm drawing up meds, I'm starting IVs, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. I need you to be driving smooth. And I actually want you to be driving slower when you're code 3 than when we're not. And people are very aware of that. But it's when we get in the rig and we're driving back to our quarters, or we're driving code 1 to another facility, that we kind of take all that for granted. And we shouldn't. This guy in this book says that in the time that you drive 1,500 feet, you're taking in enough information, it's equivalent of reading about 2 pages out of a book and flipping through a picture book at the same time. But how many of us treat driving like that? We don't. Our situational awareness goes way down when we're driving. The other reason for becoming a high resource organization, high reliability organization, is quality patient care. Meds, they're doing a better job of packaging meds. But medication errors are still one of the big things that we deal with. Nosocomial infections, medication errors, these are issues that we're dealing with, not just in hospitals, but in EMS. And it's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to figure out a way to fix that. It doesn't help that they package all these meds in similar vials and ampoules. And if you're in the heat of the moment and you're grabbing stuff, was that a napsine or was that 1 to 1,000 epi that I just broke open? I don't know. Yeah, by rights, all that kind of stuff. We want to be looking at that. But here's something that happened to me a few years ago. There was this, you guys experienced a shortage of fentanyl out here like we did. And so we kind of went back to morphine for a little while. Well, that was even getting hard to get hold of. And it wasn't like my employer set us down every time we got fentanyl or morphine from a different supplier or packaged differently and said, okay, just wanted to let you know, now you're getting 2 milligrams per milliliter instead of 4 milligrams per milliliter, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and now half the vial has air in it, where before it was completely full and there was no air in it, different things like that. So I'm in the back of the ambulance and I'm pushing morphine on this lady, and all of a sudden the vial's empty. And I start doing math in my head. And she's having crushing chest pain, and I'm trying to read a monitor, and I got a 3-minute transport time. And my vial just went in. And she's doing fine. I'm not overly worried about her, but I'm really worried about staying employed. Because the whole thing with narcotics and employers, they get really kind of picky over that stuff, have you noticed? And I got to answer for this, and I got to document this. And I start doing math, and I'm pulling out my guidebook, and I'm checking the vials. And just before we got to the hospital, I realized, no, I did administer the right dosages, and I did do this correctly. I had more air in the vial than I was used to when it came down to it. Well, about 2 months later, my former partner had a similar experience, but he actually gave half the dosage of morphine than he actually documented. He had actually only given her 3 milligrams when he thought he had given her 6. So he made a mistake, but he wasn't forthright about it because we weren't working for a learning organization. We weren't working for an organization that employed just culture. We worked for an organization that took punitive steps when we made errors. So he documented it as it really happened, not as he thought it happened. But it came through peer review, it came through quality assurance about a month later, and they came to him and they asked him, did you give 3 or 6 milligrams to that lady? And he made a second mistake and he lied about it. And so they took away they demoted him from supervisor to a lead medic, and kind of put a black flag on him for the rest of his career. Was that his fault? Was that an organizational fault? Hard to say. But we would like to say that we're all interested in patient safety and quality patient care, and that we're communicating and we're learning. And that's what brings me to job satisfaction. I used to go to these calls, and there'd be 3 or 4 patients, it'd be a major trauma call, and you know what you want to do, and it doesn't always go smoothly, and then I'd get back to the station, and I'd lay there in my bunk, and I'd process that call. It's one of the joys of being an introvert. one of the joys of being an intuitive individual, I just process and learn and pick it apart. And I'd always ask myself 3 questions. Did everybody get the care they were supposed to? Did we get them to the right hospital? And did it all go right? And usually I could answer that, yes, 2 out of 3. Did everybody get the right care? Yes. Did we get them to the right hospital? Yes. Did it all go right? No. That would drive me crazy. There's enough going on in this job that creates stress, that creates problems in our lives, that creates issues, that we don't need the additional stress of poorly run calls or mistakes or medication errors on top of all of that. We're all human. We're going to make errors. We can't be perfect. None of us can be perfect. But if we can somehow learn to work together as a team, maybe we can cover each other when we're down and when we're out. The divorce rate for EMS professionals, the substance abuse rate for cops, firefighters, the suicide rate, it's through the roof right now. And there's some good organizations that are trying to address that, but we're behind the curve on this, and we should have been addressing this for a lot longer. But if we can somehow create an organization, a high reliability organization, maybe we can reduce some of the stress that we go home from. I don't like making mistakes. I beat myself up when I make mistakes. I think most of you probably do. You wouldn't be in a quality transport program like you are if you weren't quality professionals. But that makes it all the harder when you make a mistake. I went through a phase when I first came back into EMS. I'd been out of EMS for about 15 years. And when I came back in 2010, I went through a phase where I couldn't get an IV to save my life. I was kicking myself. I hated myself. Now I teach IV starts at Union College. It's crazy. Don't tell them I can't start IVs. So how do you become an HRO? How do you get there? I believe that you get there through situational awareness. I believe that improving our individual situational awareness and improving our collective situational awareness will get us there. And real quickly, I want to cover the meat of this. Curiosity. You gotta be curious. That was me laying in my bunk at 3 o'clock in the morning, analyzing the call I was just on. What just happened? How could we have done that better? What could I have done differently? Why couldn't I get everybody to cooperate? Why couldn't we get them out of the car faster? I was talking to Angie earlier about an encounter that I had with your team a couple of years ago. We briefly lived in Valentine, Nebraska on our way to Lincoln, Nebraska. And I volunteered with the local ambulance. And I just got signed off, just done all the infectious disease and all the paperwork and all the processing. And I was the second paramedic that they had on the team up there. And I'm standing there. I actually went into the hospital to deliver my paperwork. And one of the nurses asked me if I wanted to go on a call. I don't know, can I? Sure. So that is a 6-month-old with RSV that was going to meet your team somewhere in the middle of Nebraska. I don't know where. It was pouring down rain, there was snow, it's like right around this time of year, or maybe a little bit later. And she had never intubated a kid, and the pediatrician that was going on this ride had never intubated a kid. And it's been a while since I have, but at least I've intubated kids. And she goes, all right, you're going with us. So I'm in the back of this ambulance looking at this little girl breathing 60 times a minute, wondering, when am I going to tube her? Because I don't like it when they breathe that fast. And I also didn't want to mess with something that was going right. Curiosity and processing. good communication principles. That's something that you mentioned earlier, leadership, communication. How can we find a way to communicate with each other that is cooperative? That we're not stepping on toes, we're not putting, just because I ask you, are you sure you want to give her 1,000 milligrams of Lasix? Doesn't mean you're an idiot. Just may have meant that something came out of your mouth that you didn't mean to. Random words. Cooperation. I think this is really the big one that I thrive on. People will ask questions. They're sense-making. They're clarifying. They're trying to figure out, is that the way we do it? How do we cooperate with each other? When Lifelight added paramedics to the flight team at Lifelight, the nurses were used to running the show by themselves. All very highly charged, driven individuals. And then they hired the best of the best for the paramedics to come work for them, keyword for, and we weren't used to working for anybody. We were used to running calls. And there wasn't really a clash because we were smart enough to know that, ooh, we just got hired as flight paramedics. I don't think they rock this boat. But at the same time, we knew things that they didn't know, especially about scene calls, because we'd grown up. We cut our teeth on scene calls. And so we learned a lot. I learned about IV pumps, and I learned about intra-aortic pumps, and I learned about all kinds of stuff, flight medicine. But at the same time, we took them out and we taught them extrication classes and we taught them safety and we helped them get rid of their polyester jumpsuits and move into Nomex flight suits. And just, you know, there was a real cooperative spirit there. The curiosity, it's good for individuals to be curious, but the organization needs to be curious also. We all need to be learning. We all need to be thinking. We all need to be trying to figure out what's the next step. It was great. One of my first partners was one of the first cardiac technicians in the country. He was one of those guys carrying around a LifePak 99 in the back of a Ford or a Dodge van with a nurse precepting them. And they had one of the first out-of-hospital cardiac saves with that LifePak 99. And I got to work with that guy. And you know what? We've come a long way since 1969. And we need to keep thinking, what's next? I keep hearing about new technologies and new things, and maybe there's still new things to be discovered. Resilience. What is resilience? Why do people need to have resilience? Why does an organization need to have it? What is resilience?
Not giving up.
Not giving up. My brother-in-law is a cage fighter. Why somebody at 42 years old would want to climb into a cage and have somebody beat them, I don't know. But he's a mixed martial arts. He's my size. Well, he was until about 3 years ago. Now he's got about 20 pounds on him. But one of the key things about being hit or being in a fight is not focusing on being hit. If you're in a fight and somebody hits you, you got to ignore that punch. And you got to keep doing your job, which may be to escape or maybe to try something differently. And it's the same thing within EMS or any organization. You may get slapped down, but you don't give up. You may make a mistake. You may not be able to start an IV to save your life or your patient's, but you don't quit. You keep moving forward. Post-incident analysis. So we did this after that aborted flight going through the mountains of southwest Portland. But we didn't share it with anybody. And what I found is when I worked on an ambulance and I spent 48 hours with somebody, just one-on-one, the two of us in a station or in the ambulance together, we did a lot of sharing and we did a lot of talking. But when I worked in a fire station with 8 other guys, we didn't talk. we'd come back from the call, and it wasn't cool to talk about the call you were just on. You know, my partner and I sometimes were like, that was really cool. Did you notice how when you pushed the adenosine and then this happened and wow? But when we got back into the station, we couldn't talk about that. We had to go back and talk about hunting and fishing and cards. And it just wasn't, there was no curiosity, there was no post-incident analysis. And high reliability organizations, every call, everything you will ask questions about. And it's got to start with your team leader. And it's great when you wrap up the call, say you're at a fire scene, boom, 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 you had a good knockdown, you put it all out, you're getting ready to leave, and your team leader comes up to you and says, that was really interesting. Here's what I learned. And here's what I wish I had done differently. What do you guys think? 5 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. And there's a little bit of BS going on. There's a little bit of joking. There's a little bit of teasing. And you pull all that together. And if there was something to be learned, then the team leader then in a learning organization has a format to then pass that on to the QI committee and to the training division, and everybody gets to learn from that. But the important thing is that team just pulled together and they built more community. And that can happen in the break room, it can happen in the day room, it can happen sitting around the coffee table. When I first started in the fire service, people go out and drink the next morning when they got off of work. Bars would open at 7, we got off work at 7, we'd go out and drink. And if there was a big call, we'd kind of talk about it. Wow, that was really horrible, but most we just numbed it. And then we go skiing all day or something like that. But if you can find a format that you can do post-incident analysis, even in the informal setting, and even if you can practice good communication principles just when you're hanging out. You go out to breakfast in the morning or at shift change or whatever. One of the things I always liked about working in a hospital is the shift change. And when the nurses do report and everybody's in the same room together and they just go around and they talk about, oh, the patient bed free and patient, oh, yeah. And then the rapport and the communication that took place in that environment, I always appreciated that. It didn't happen in the fire station that way. The drivers, they'd talk about equipment and stuff, but nobody else really talked about that. Part of good communication is conflict. You gotta be able, you gotta have permission to raise questions. And that goes back to management. That goes back to your superiors. They need to give you the permission. You need to know that you can address issues that you're uncomfortable with. When something's ambiguous, when something just doesn't feel right, really, should we be flying into these clouds at only 800? You know, I'm looking at the ground radar and it says we're pretty low here. Should we really? You got to have permission to raise questions, to ask those questions. The airline has developed this process they call PACE. Anybody ever heard of PACE? As far as conflict communication tool? Let me just go through that real quick. So P stands for probing. Something doesn't seem right to you. Something seems out of sorts. So you ask questions. There's an example in this book where a new rookie firefighter was asked to go up on a roof with his team and open a hole and ventilate and let so that the attack crew could go in. But he knew, he just came out of training, that it's like, yeah, that doesn't look safe. But also because of his training and the drill sergeant approach, he didn't feel safe probing. But in other organizations where you go, really? You want to give 1,000 milligrams of lasers? Really? Yeah, you just, what are you thinking there? You're just probing. So the next level is to alert. You're probing, and you're still not getting the answer back that you want. And that's in that DC-8 that went down in Portland, that's where the co-pilot, the flight engineer stopped. They didn't alert. They asked, you know, we're getting low on fuel, but they didn't alert him. They didn't reach out and like, hey, you know, pay attention here. And then you challenge. So they want you to go on the roof. They want you to cut a hole. They want you to ventilate. It's unsafe. They want you to go on a flight. You're looking at the weather. You're not a pilot. You're not FAA trained. You're not certified. I'm going to challenge you on this. I'm going to say this doesn't seem safe. Is that easy to do? For some people, some of us were bred in conflict. And we've been challenging the social norms. There's a bumper sticker in Oregon. I haven't seen it here in Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa area, but it's question authority. I was raised on that mantra. I have dozens of lieutenants and captains and supervisors that I work for that I need to go back and apologize to because I always questioned authority. I was just, as a paramedic, I was just a lowly firefighter. But when you get on a medical scene, all of a sudden I became the incident commander, even though I didn't have bars on my collar. And I made life miserable for these guys. I've been able to apologize to a couple of them. I've run into them at retirement receptions and funerals, and they've appreciated that. But I need to write a book or a song like Adele did and get it out there. There's dozens of people I need to apologize to. But I'm not afraid to challenge, but most people are. Most people will not challenge. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to make other people lose their dignity. They don't want to make the other people look stupid. But for situational awareness, for crew resource management to work, you've got to have permission to challenge. You've got to get beyond the probing. Really? Really? You really want to do that? To the point of, no, that's not right. That's against protocol. That's not the way we do things. Because organizations get into this thing that we call drift. We know the policy, but we drifted away from it because that's the way we've always done it. There was an incident that happened at my former employer, and I heard about this right after it happened, even though I wasn't there anymore. They went to this big fire. It was a 3-alarm fire. And like always, when the fire was over, they had some dirty hose or a defective hose, and they rolled it up. It was 100 feet of 6-inch hose. It stacks about that big. It weighs about 150 pounds. And they just threw it on the tailboard, and they were going to drive back to the station, only a couple miles away. Well, about 20 minutes after they got back to the station, they got a call from NBC. And when they got there, and it required some heavy extrication, and they're pulling this guy out, they discovered this roll of hose under the car. We've always rolled hose and thrown it on the tailboard. But what we didn't take into consideration is people don't ride on the tailboard anymore, so tailboards are smaller. We used to have people back there who could stand on the hose. I've done that. I've ridden on the back of the tailboard. I'm standing on the hose so it doesn't bounce off. Now we just have it back there. It's not strapped down. The tailboard is smaller. You're going down a bumpy road. It falls off. Guy comes along in the dark, crashes into it, and dies. That's what we call policy drift. Now, to their credit, a friend of mine, I was talking to him on the phone like a few days after this. Before this hit the news, before it hit the 7 o'clock news cycle, the fire chief took full responsibility for this. And went on the news and personally said, we messed up. It was our fault. We don't know what. We don't know all the details of it, but we're taking full responsibility. They took the hit from the lawsuit. They paid all that. And the insurance companies and the attorneys, they pushed and pushed and pushed because they wanted to know the individual who was responsible. But my former employer refused to tell them that because it wasn't an individual issue, it was a policy drift issue. And to this day, the person who was driving, it never went public, and they went on to a very satisfying career. The fourth part of the PACE acronym is emergency intervention. And this may actually involve grabbing somebody or standing in front of them. I have actually been on the scene and grabbed somebody by the lapels to stop them from doing something. Now, sadly, that didn't go well because he took it personally. But something about grabbing people by the lapels and bringing them close, they take that personally. I don't know why. But there may be a time, if my kids were going to run out in front of a bus, would I take intervention and grab them? Absolutely. If somebody was going to defibrillate somebody who didn't need to be defibrillated, would you step in, turn off the power, pull the cord, do something? Of course you would. What often happens, though, is we go from probing to emergency intervention too quickly. We become over-aggressive and we step in too quickly. But we need to be willing to go through this process. Finally, we need cooperation. Cooperation comes when we're all technically proficient. We're all good at what we do. We train well, we work together, and you know you can trust each other. So one of the things I alluded to in my video is that a second-in crew working for a different agency, they trusted them. They didn't bring in their own kids. They didn't step in. They didn't walk over the top of them. But they trusted the other crew to have it put together and to be doing it correctly. Can we do that? Can we trust each other? Can we trust other organizations? Can we trust people that, well, when we work together and we train together and we talk together and we hang out together, that trust builds and we don't walk on each other so well. And then there's a lot of talk in the New Age community about mindfulness, but this is mindful as far as when you're on scene, you're very aware. You're paying attention to things. I try to teach this to my students. Every scenario, scene safe BSI, but I don't even know what they're saying. If we could have guns on campus, I'd love to hide guns under my patients and do things like that. But I walked into a scene one time, and there's a 80-year-old guy sitting over there in his recliner. And you know how 80-year-old guys get. They get so pretty soon everything is hanging out around the recliner, and they don't have to get up. My dad's that way. My dad just turned 81. Everything is right there within reach. And if they do get up, it's to get food or go to the bathroom. But they got everything right there. And so he's right there, and there's 2 or 3 medics from the fire department asking him questions and treating him. And then there's about 3 other firefighters standing in the back of the room and a couple police officers standing in the back. And my partner and I, on the ambulance, we came in last, and so there's barely room in this living room. And I'm standing there, and I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And I look over, and there's a shotgun leaning up against the wall by this guy's recliner. Everything's within reach, right? So I lean over to the cop, and I go, see that shotgun? His eyebrows go way up, and he weaves his way through the crowd and goes and gets it. Situationally aware, mindful of what's going on in the situation around you. Always paying attention. Now, one of the things I've learned about myself is I'm very intuitive and I'm very aware. But communicating that to my team is key to helping them develop their situational awareness. To be standing in a room and catch a change in the shadow down the hallway because there's somebody down the hallway in a bedroom and you didn't know they were there. I catch those things, but a lot of people don't. How can you pass that on to your team? How do you communicate over your headset? Hey, you see that aircraft off there over 9 o'clock? Pilots love it when you point out other aircrafts. Have you noticed that? Because they can't see everything. So remain mindful of what's going on around you. So crew resource management. Why? Because we want to be a high reliability organization. Safety of yourself, safety of your team, quality patient care. Isn't that why we got into this? You want to make a difference. Job satisfaction. I don't want to go home worrying about stuff I don't need to worry about. How do you do that? Through situational awareness. Curiosity, communication, cooperation. That's how we pull that together. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? I do have some surveys. I'd love to get your feedback. Like I told you, I thrive on conflict, so feel free to be honest.
How long ago was that Valentine call you went on and met us?
The which one?
You met us outside of Norfolk?
It was 2013. Spring of 2013.
I was with you.
Were you?
Yeah.
Okay. Some little pizza place or bar or something in the middle of it was outside of Norfolk?
Yeah, because we were going to fly to Valentine. It was too rainy.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I was in street clothes, I was a little man, I was
Just little baby.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was just a paramedic, and it's like, I think this kid might need to be intubated. I don't know, did you intubate him?
I don't think we